All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are grateful that you made it back from lunch and assume only now the food comas will begin settling in. If they do settle in, just be aware that we are filming today, so you may be caught on tape, and that's kind of at your own peril. So just know you carry that risk. We're glad to have you here. The name of this session is Upskill, Reskill, and Repeat, How to Get Ready for Career-Long Learning. And the name of the facilitator for this session, that's me, is Jonathan Monk, and I'm a general manager here at Degreed. And with us here are three experts on helping people develop and communicate skills and develop careers. And we have representation across a really great variety of industries, the professional association side, higher education, and the enterprise and corporate environments. So here to my far side is Robert David. He is the Director of Corporate Learning at UC Berkeley. Robert has more than 30 years experience in client development roles, including working with many tech companies in Silicon Valley. He is the Executive Director of UC Berkeley's Extension HR Learning Advisory Board and is the Education Architect for UC Berkeley's University Partnership Program. I should mention UC Berkeley is not a current Degreed partner, but depending on how this conversation goes, we might be able to change some things. Thank you for being with us, Robert. And then next to Robert is Maria Theodotou, recently the Director of Professional Development at the Computer Science Teachers Association, the CTSA. In her role with the CTSA, Marina offered K12 computer science teachers access to meaningful professional development through a partnership that she has developed with Degreed. Marina's career is both long and both deep and broad. She has worked in many different fields, including financial services, management consulting, L&D, and the K12 environments. And being from Cyprus, she has also a lot of great international experience that she brings with us. So thank you for being with us, Marina.
Jonathan.
And then right here next to me is Robert Paul Duve. Robert Paul is a senior manager at Accenture. He has worked in management consulting and in health, public services, and recently in the high-tech industry. And he is also responsible for the Skills to Succeed track within the Accenture Innovation Awards program. Thank you for coming across the pond from the Netherlands to be with us today.
Thank you.
Please welcome our panelists. Today we're going to be talking about the trends of skills. How do we develop skills, and how do we talk and think about skills through the lens of an individual's career? The fact that careers now last 40, 50, 60 plus years, and the fact that skills continue to become shorter and shorter lived does have an impact, and we're here to discuss the impact and how do we as professionals in this space accommodate the trends that are happening in the space. So I want to first kind of ask a general question, a broad question, and we'll start with you, Robert David, and that is, and this will be for all three of you, but start with you, Robert David, and that is, how are you addressing the need for constant upskilling?
So at UC Berkeley, a lot of people know us for our graduate, undergraduate programs, but in addition to the 40,000 students we have on campus, each year we do about 40,000 enrollments for continuing education and executive education and online education. And on top of that, in the last 3 years, we've trained about 2.5 million people through edX courses. So we do a lot of MOOCs. Because adult learners are basically learning while earning, they're working jobs, we've had to create courses and modalities and programs that really sort of fit the new adult learner, especially for skill building.
Great. Marina, your thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. So from the K12 perspective, we need to think more about skilling, and we need to think more about the K12 student, because they're actually the talent that grows up and becomes a member of your talent team a few years later. So it's very critical to be able to focus on what those skills are in K12, and in my most recent role, our focus was in computer science. So focusing on the skills for the K12 student actually translated in focusing on providing professional development to the K12 teacher. So there is a supply chain, if you will, of preparation to ensure that we have the right skills as an individual grows from K12, goes to higher ed, and then transitions into the corporate world.
Yeah, and we'll talk some more about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Robert, Paul, what's your perspective on that in terms of the way you think about upskilling and the changes that are happening?
Well, from an Accenture perspective, there's a lot to tell. But actually, the main reason that I'm here is that I'm working on a very exciting project that started about 1.5 years ago, when we were approached by a Dutch business university called Nyenrode. And they actually had the question to us, well, can you help us move into the digital space, develop digital content and blended learning offerings? And actually we were quite triggered by that question, and I facilitated a few workshops together with them to explore if there was any common interest, common ground. And even more energy came out of those workshops. So we decided back in the summer of last year to start a kind of a lean startup project in a joint team together with them to solve that issue. And what we started with was very much looking at how can we digitize their existing content and offer those via the existing channels, like in the form of MOOCs. But after a short time, we actually came to the conclusion that we couldn't be very differentiating on that or very innovative. So we actually started rethinking the concept, and we thought, well, how cool and interesting would it be if we could actually better facilitate the informal learning journey of the workforce and learn from what they are actually learning and where they are learning and what they are learning and how they are learning. And if we better understand that, then actually leverage the strength, the current strength of this business university in providing master classes, activity-based learning. They have a great alumni network and a great venue close to Amsterdam. And actually blend that in the informal learning journey for the people that we can target directly, or actually improve the content based on the things that we've learned from the learners. And as Accenture, we want to step in by leveraging our strengths and aligning those learning journeys with the strategic objectives of our clients, curating learning content around the critical skill sets, and enabling the change to make learning really a daily habit.
Great. And so going back to you, Robert, David, as you think about, you're in this unique position where as a university you're issuing degrees. And so what's been the incentive around this emphasis that you have on continued education beyond that formal piece of paper? Tell us a little bit about that, and then how do you think about skill development in that context?
Yeah, so each one of our programs where I'm working at right now has an advisory council of people that are from practitioners to the business, and we're constantly getting reviewed of our material so that we make sure that it's basically meeting the skills that are required by industry or government or nonprofits. We run about 1,200 courses a year, at least just in the programs that I run in, and so we take away the programs that are not working in terms of student enrollments and bring in ones that are basically for the future where people are trying to train up their workforces. One of the most recent developments is the fact that we've gone now to more of a boot camp format for some of our programs where people are looking to take time off of work or being sent by their employer to come to Berkeley for 5 or 6 weeks and do a program there. So it's sort of changed the way we do some of our courses. And we also do a flipped classroom where people are studying online before they get to campus, so that it's more for that interaction with the professor or the lecturer as opposed to past times where it might be throughout the entire course.
So just as a follow-up to that, how do you even know which skills to focus on at any given time, right? Because curriculums will lag the demand in the marketplace. And so you have this unique challenge of keeping up with the demand that's in the market, and that is probably pertinent within an enterprise as well as just within the labor market in general. How do you address that issue, and how do you make sure that wherever you're putting your resources to develop coursework, recruit students in, help them get through the programs, how do you keep a pulse on that?
So once a semester, we run our advisory council of CHROs and CLOs on campus. We're basically bringing them in on a consistent basis and asking them for their input. So it's a sort of a feedback loop that's on a constant basis throughout the year. We're not waiting once a year or every 5 years to change our content.
Got it. And Marina, from your perspective, and I'll get your comment as well, you know, in particular with computer science, right? This is a hard skill-based curriculum, and the skills that you're, you know, teaching these instructors and teachers in K-12, you know, those skills come and go very quickly, and even more quickly as technology continues to accelerate. So how do you keep up with the demands of that ever-changing landscape of what are the pertinent skills today? And the example is, you know, machine learning, AI, right? These things that we've kind of talked about in concept for a long time are now becoming practical skills that people need to have. And so how do you address that issue?
Absolutely. So it is a challenge because, as you mentioned, Jonathan, computer science changes. However, there are fundamental components that remain the same. So computational thinking is one of them, and the fundamentals of coding is another. So what we try to do is a little bit of what Robert mentioned. So make sure that we have the pulse of the industry and meet with the industry and connect to hear what it is that they need when the students come out and become talent in their organizations. What are the key components? And then we try to translate that back into the standards that computer science students need to know in the classroom. And then furthermore, we have to translate those standards for the students into professional development components and standards for the professional development, or L&D in our speak, for the K-12 teachers. So that's the process that we follow. It's very much similar to what Robert mentioned, but in a different setting. And it's a little tougher because when we think about talent and we think about skills, we tend to stop in higher ed and we don't continue that progression to think in more specificity that those talent and that skill has to actually be nurtured and begun in K-12.
So how do you think about that thread, right? There's the K-12 setting. We sort of have that good representation here, right? I'm in K-12, I'm developing and learning skills there. I go on to higher education, and eventually I end up in a career. And so in your opinion, how do we connect the dots between those different worlds?
I'm so glad you asked that. So actually I wrote an article about this recently in Chief Learning Officer magazine, where it's called the high cost of K-12 learning and development. And the gap is, that we see is the lack of communication or conversation between the K-12 administrators and the chief learning officers. And we highly encourage that, because that will help the organizations or the corporates over here understand what are the needs in the classroom and how can we better help invest in the teacher professional development. And there are two numbers I'd like to share here. One is the cost of an unengaged employee. LinkedIn did a report earlier this year, you may have seen it, that actually priced the cost of an engaged employee up to $50,000 per year. So let's keep that $50,000 in mind. And then over here, the cost of investing in K-12 for a professional development for a K-12 teacher is about $10,000 per year. So the investment of $10,000 or the cost of $50,000 a few years later, that's a question we'd like to pose.
Excellent. Did you have a thought on that as well?
Well, I also see in our company new collaborations between our business and universities. And for instance, in the Netherlands, and I believe it's broader in Europe, we have a joint initiative with INSEAD, where we actually developed a digital platform together, where we feed in their courses and materials, and put in some gamification elements, and actually our strategy workforce, every one of them, is enrolled in that program, and well, we hear a lot of very positive response on that, and we're actually collaborating together with them to shape the curriculum and the course content, and actually building also the platform that facilitates it.
So in your opinion, kind of to take that one step further, it's sort of one thing to keep a pulse on the market, and then it's another thing to realize I'm investing potentially millions of dollars into skills that will be outdated in a matter of months, maybe a few years potentially. How do you think about that? How can you justify spending those dollars knowing that those skills will be outdated? We'll go here and then we'll go to
I think it's a very interesting question and some kind of a contradiction there, because on the one hand you're investing a lot of money in career development, and careers tend to get shorter at one company, but I think that, as the first keynote speaker explained very clearly, that the current workforce wants to be challenged and motivated, and they want prospect and career development opportunities. Actually, also just to protect their own employability. So if you don't invest and challenge them and motivate them and offer those career growth opportunities, they will actually leave earlier, and so the average career length will even become even shorter.
Your thoughts?
I was just going to say that not all skills need changing. I mean, look at some of the old school skills like leadership and management, sales. You know, there are things that aren't going to be changing every few years, but people want to have those soft skills, and a lot of the university programs actually sort of cater to that. When people are using people like Berkeley or Harvard to deliver a program, it usually is around soft skill development.
Great. And you know, as you think about that kind of generally, we're getting at this sort of theme of we have to be investing in people and have people be willing to learn new skills or continue to hone and maintain some more of these evergreen type of skills. So there's two parts to this question. One is, what are the skills that are more evergreen? And Marina, I'd love your thoughts on that. And then the follow-up question is, what is the culture you need to set to create the environment where people can continue to learn and want to continue to learn new skills? So Marina, let's start with you.
Thank you. So the evergreen skills, I think we discussed this earlier this morning with Alexandra Kavulakos, who mentioned to us that we're looking at probably two sides, the soft skills and then the data analytics or the hard skills. And the World Economic Forum also published a list a few weeks ago around the same topic. And there is a push to make us think about the skills that are needed in 2020 or 2021. Actually, some more analytics that have been done by PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Higher Education Consortium came out with numbers showing that data analytics and data science are really, really important. And by 2021, the market will need about 69% of the new graduates having those skills. Well, today the market is only able to provide about 30%. So how do we close that gap? And this brings us to the second part of your question, where we have a responsibility to connect the thread from K12 to higher ed to corporate and make sure that we're all working together to ensure that the talent gets that skill, and use Degree to I'm going to promote Degree here, use Degree to actually track those skills in the lifetime of that learner. But also you asked that, I believe, about how do we create that environment. So it's at the leadership level, making sure that we engage in a conversation that encompasses everyone. And actually another suggestion that I've made recently is that every university should have its chief learning officer that serves as a point of contact within the university, so that CLO at the university can speak the same language with the CLO at the corporate, and they can converse and make scalable programs within the PPP environment that they can set up to promote the skills that we need. So that's at the leadership level, but then at the individual level, we need to empower the individual. So when Aaron spoke with us earlier today, he spoke about purpose. So we have a responsibility as individuals to reflect and think through of what it is that we're good at and we're passionate about, and then distill that into skills so that we can also be part of that of that effort. And I've used this previously, and I'll use it again here. The ancient Greeks would say that with the power of the gods, you also have to move your hand to get things done. So the power of the gods, the powers that be, the leadership, we need to bring them together, but also as individuals, we have to also make the first move so that we can be part of the narrative of skilling and upskilling.
So that's fantastic. And Robert David, I want to ask you this question. What do you do with someone who's just not motivated to develop skills, right? Not everyone out there is saying, I can't wait to learn a new programming language.
Exactly. One of the first things I'd always recommend people is hire naturally curious people. And if you look around the room here, I'm sure most people are here because they want to learn, they want to take advantage of that. I don't think you could force feed a skill onto somebody. They have to have sort of a motivation and incentive to do it. And you have to find the right incentive for the person. Is it promotion at work? Is it some sort of career progression they're going on? And then sort of match that up. And this is where potentially a degree could help out in this sort of identification along somebody's career path. But you can't force somebody to learn something they don't want to learn. That's not a winning solution.
And Robert, Paul, what would you say to that? I mean, as you administer learning within your enterprise environment, what are the, how much do you balance between you use a carrot versus a stick in helping people develop those skills, right? There seems to be some sort of balance required. Even in your response, you're saying, what is that carrot? But there also needs to be the architecture and structure behind it. So how would you think about that?
Actually, I think that in our organization, where the pendulum is moving from the command and control approach. When I started in 2005, we had just, I think at every level, we had just this mandatory curriculum. Actually, your whole budget was spent on this mandatory curriculum. And now we're moving much more toward a facilitate and stimulate approach where we do suggestions of learning that fit your career track and talent segment and are also, of course, beneficial to the business, but not so much from a mandatory and stick perspective. But what I found also interesting, in addition to what you said about this constant change and constant need for reskilling, is that I think that all that change also poses some stress for a lot of people, because you're actually never at a landing point where you can sit back and enjoy what you've learned. You already start to learn new things. And what we do at Accenture is that we really adopt this, what we call truly human approach, having attention for all aspects, also mental health, fitness, and also learnability, adaptability. So we're already rolling out programs to support people to go to sport, have a better work-life balance, and actually everything to help them also absorb that new knowledge and stuff.
Do you agree with the assertion that curiosity is an important ingredient in this? And if you do, how do you find those people?
Well, I think it comes from both sides. I think as a company you need to be articulate about your purpose and what you want to achieve and what you offer in terms of assignments and personal development. And I think for the individual it is very important to have the feeling that they are really intellectually challenged and also can relate their personal objectives to the purpose of the organization.
Excellent. And Marina, I want to touch on this because you have this unique perspective where you have gone through meaningful changes in your own career. And so we're talking about this conceptually right now, but let's bring it back to your personal level and your personal experience. What has been the tools that you've used to move from place to place, and maybe give a bit of context behind what has triggered those changes for you?
Thank you, Jonathan. So, yeah, I've had a broad and varied career in different geographies. So, Americas, European Union, and the Middle East, different sectors. So, private sector, government, and nonprofit/associations, but also different verticals. So, banking, financial services, management, consulting, and now learning development. So as I look back, a few years ago, I had to take a step back and reflect and think, okay, how am I going to describe to the next employer where I've been and what I can do for them? That's really the question. And so when I thought back, I could pull one thread, and that thread was learning, and always be learning. That's the bottom line. And how do you do that? How do you always learn? Well, mentoring is a great way to begin. So seek out mentors, but also always read. I've been reading a lot. I don't own a TV. That's another thing I can share. So I don't spend any time watching TV, and I spend a lot of time reading. And I'm always looking at thought leaders out there in our industry right now, learning and development, and following what it is that they're doing. But another thing that I noticed that has been helpful in this trajectory has been the ability to connect the dots. So being able to move from industry to industry and geography to geography, you learn a lot. So in reflecting, you can actually pick things that you learned in a new setting and move them and test them in the next setting. So that's essentially another thing that I've been doing. Learning skills, so Six Sigma Black Belt at Bank of America, taking that, moving it into a new geography in the Middle East, and working for a nonprofit. I can tell you that Six Sigma stuff, I never talked about it, implementing it, but in the back of my mind, it really helped me do things and set up an office and hire people and set up processes and procedures where there was nothing. And then again, in learning and development, bringing all that learning and learning instructional design and putting all that experience into programs that are meaningful for learners out there, professionals, because our learning programs need to be tied to business performance results, but also they need to reflect the challenges in the real world that we're facing. So connecting the dots and reflecting, and also keeping up with the trends in the industry and trying to think ahead what is missing and what's going on in other industries that we can possibly bring in. Earlier today I attended the Deloitte persona workshop, and that was really, really interesting because what we were learning in that workshop, for those of you that had attended, is that we're taking learnings from marketing and applying them into L&D. So it's a lot of benchmarking. Benchmarking was one of my roles at Bank of America. So it's interesting how all of these little things are coming together and creating a perspective that hopefully will be valuable to the next employer.
So are the dots skills? How would you describe, when you say connecting the dots?
Yes.
What are those?
The dots are skills, actually. The dots are skills. Thank you. That's, yeah, the dots are skills. So they're hard skills, so Six Sigma Black Belt or analytics or being able to build a strategic plan, but also the soft skills. So being able to connect with people, being able to articulate and storytell, being able to inspire and engage teams, diverse teams across industries or teams of volunteers. It so happens that I've been doing a lot of this recently, engaging with volunteers. Earlier, Aaron spoke with us about how volunteers work for no pay. So you have to tap into that particular need the volunteer has, which is giving back and being able to articulate that. So yes, the dots are skills. Thank you.
So Robert, David,
I say no TV. That's got to be rough. You're going to miss the 9th season of Curb Your Enthusiasm this Sunday
Oh,
with distant cousin Larry, David.
I have Amazon Prime, so
Okay.
I get my fix there.
as you think about, Robert, David, as you think about the curricula that you create and the people that you have going through your programs, and it'd be helpful maybe to touch on who those people are. Is your goal that they have dots when they leave those programs, when they take and finish those classes?
Absolutely. Every one of our courses has a syllabus. There's learner outcomes. There's hope for outcomes. And I forgot to mention before that all of our instructors are basically practitioners that know how to teach. And so not only are we getting it from the advisory, but from the people that are actually in the classrooms or online. There are actually maybe people from the audience here, maybe some Berkeley professors out here. And so we measure that and are looking at outcomes a year or 2 years later. The average age of one of our adult learners is 34. The median age is 31. So we do a lot of analytics and tracking of people going through it, see what success looks like. And were they a director and now they're a senior director? Were they a director and they moved to a VP slot? So we're actually able to sort of measure that and manage that with the use of LinkedIn and seeing where people progress in their careers. So it is pretty critical to demonstrate success at Berkeley.
Yeah, thank you. I want to read a quick quote and then gather some reactions from the group here. William, I don't know if I know how to pronounce his last name, William Blaise, the SVP of HR at AT&T, he recently said this: "There's going to be an expectation that your compensation will be tied to continuing to learn." That's a pretty bold statement. So Robert Paul, how would you react to that as you think about your role within Accenture and sort of the critical nature and vision that you see in developing skills? Will it come to that?
Actually, we have implemented a new performance management system, and it's called performance achievement. And it's very much about looking forward instead of looking back. And everybody needs to formulate his priorities for the coming year in terms of learning, but also in terms of the project that you want to do, the impact that you want to make. And you get, you have a lot of talent discussions with your managers, also with your peers about it. And actually your final rewards and promotion options are also very much tied to that. And so I think we made the shift from looking back in your performance management to looking forward, and also looking at your learning achievements and the impact that you've made, and tie that to your career progression.
Okay, Marina, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll actually quote the Chief Learning Officer of JP Morgan Chase, Jesse Jackson. He said this a few days ago at a CLO breakfast. He said that the earning curve is the learning curve. And that, I think, just sums it up.
So you mean more in terms of the future earning potential will depend on your current willingness to learn. What about, I'll ask you this, the harder version of the question, which is
Why are we not a degreed customer?
Variable pay based on learning? Is that the future?
No, I had lunch last week with former head of learning from one of the largest financial services companies in the U.S., and they're now talking about learning on the one-on-ones and the performance management reviews. So I think they're making it part of the discussion. It's not part of the discussion, it's going to get ignored or glossed over. But if they're putting it, the managers are putting it, what have you learned in the last month or last quarter, and they're actually measuring people on that, I think that's really a critical step.
Great. So I want to kind of switch gears for a minute and talk about the actual types of programs we create and how much freedom do we give to learners to kind of learn and follow whatever their own passions are. And I look at my own children and I see they have natural curiosities, and my role as their parent is one of them is to nurture that interest and help them learn and grow the way they want to. How much of that carries through into the organizational side or into professional development? In other words, on the one hand, you could have a full top-down program where we're saying, here are the skills you need to learn, and these are the only skills we care about you learning. On the other end of the spectrum, you could have learn whatever you want to learn, and we trust that some of that will match to what is needed in the organization. So, Robert, Paul, do you see a scenario where you're paying someone to learn how to fly fish or learn how to cook?
Well, I actually love the idea, and I believe at Degreed you can just choose whatever you like to learn.
That's true. At Degreed you can.
Well, I think we're not there yet at Accenture. Actually, if you want to do a course that is not in the, let's say, the more standard curriculum, aligned to your career track and talent segment, and then your career counselor has to approve, and then there is also some kind of a secondary approval, and I've been a secondary approver for in my practice, and well, actually I approved most of the things.
Any interesting ones?
But not actually no. Well, a lot of what we actually see is that a lot of, especially the younger people, they want to do a course in faraway locations, and to really have the learning as an experience, including the travel and meeting people from across the globe and stuff like that. But I didn't really see any fly fishing course requests.
What do you think about that, Marina? Where's the balance need to be?
My thoughts there are around balance, actually. So none of the extremes, no top down, here's the autocratic way, here's what you have to learn, and not complete freedom over here, because then people can go off on different tangents. So it would have to be a convergence of the individual, empowering the individual to be able to find the resources or provide them the resources so that they can grow as a well-rounded person. Because essentially, or eventually, what we want is talent that's well-rounded and balanced. We talk a lot about work-life balance. Well, that's probably one of the cells where we can influence that and help the individual be more balanced by helping them nurture what it is they're more passionate about outside the work that they're doing in our organization. So it would have to be a combination of the two coming together, the organization providing the resources and the guidance, and the individual being inspired and empowered to not only follow the organizational skill requirements, but also nurture their own personal growth.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is it's an and scenario, not an
Yes.
or scenario, right?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily only learn this or learn this instead of the fly fishing, right? You're saying, here's the standards we need to have, and add to that the other interests that you have.
Absolutely, and if we go back to the great example of Steve Jobs, that he took that class of calligraphy that later on served him so well in giving us all these amazing fonts in our Apple products. Absolutely, it's an and A and D scenario.
Yeah. Great.
Thank
I think the calligraphy class was not through TRP, through Tuition Reimbursement Program, but probably an individual payment from Steve. I mean, everybody here, probably in the audience, has company money to spend on education with universities or accredited institutions, and then individuals could obviously take whatever they want off the company time. One of the things that we get asked is, we don't require people to take education because it's going past the 40-hour work week, or it's going to be nights and weekends. And so that's where a lot of times we might get called from an L&D group to do a custom program during the day, spread out throughout the year, where there's assignments. And so it's like bringing college to the company as opposed to the other way around.
So just as we think about even the concept of all of these different ways to learn and learning based on my interest and my passions, it obviously leads its way into the measurement conversation. And so, Robert, I want to ask you this question of, how do we think about, how should we be thinking about measurement? And in particular, what are some underserved populations where this might be really helpful? So higher education or military veterans, for example.
Yeah, so we actually do a fair amount of work with the military at Berkeley. You wouldn't really put the two together, but we do. And they have GI Bill, but then we also do a bunch of what they call broadening programs. And so it's really based on how do we fit within their existing learning infrastructure and basically add to it through the professors or instructors at Berkeley. Most companies will, do some sort of assessment in terms of, again, skill needs going out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and come to universities like ours and say, this is where we're going. Can you create curriculum that's going to actually match up to it to help train our people better?
Fantastic, fantastic. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to just kind of end with this one pointed question, which is, whose job is it to develop individual skills? And we'll start with you, Robert Paul. Whose job is it? Is that the job of the L&D professional? And remember who we're talking to as we answer, but whose job is it? Is it the job of higher education to determine the skills and lead that? Is it the job of L&D? Is it the job of the enterprise? Is it the job of K12? Is it the job of the individual? How do you think about that?
Well, I think that this siloed approach is actually getting away. The old script of going to school, imagine what your profession could be, going to college and then practice that profession, that's dying. And actually we need to find new ways to collaborate with companies and both L&D people and I think also the CEO becoming more and more strategic issue, and with the academia and with the associations and with government to find new ways to support lifelong and continuous learning. And so across those silos, working together and find new models to collaborate on that.
It takes a learning village, right?
That's right.
All the different groups.
What are your thoughts?
It's everyone's job. So we have to understand and figure out what is our part in that narrative. So the individual, the K12 teacher, the learning and development professional, the CEO, the leader, the government, State Board of Education administrator, it's all of our jobs. The challenge is, how do we bring everybody together, and who does that? Who brings everybody together to engage them in that broader narrative? And I shouldn't forget the corporations, because they have the big pockets.
There's any software companies that make it frictionless to make this whole thing
If
Maybe
only
happen?
there
Degree
were.
could take the lead here.
And also the individual. I think there's a lot of responsibility with the individual as well.
Absolutely.
Actually, when I was invited for this panel, I've never been on a panel before, so my first reaction was, well, I'm just going to sit back in the audience and listen. But on second thought, I thought, well, this is about reskilling and upskilling, so I really need to step out of my comfort zone.
There you go.
Take ownership of doing that, and I will probably earn a lot of degree points.
That's right.
doing it.
There you go.
Let's hear it for our panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. And just by order of keeping us on schedule here, the next upcoming sessions are the expert boot camps.